Picture a world of ash and silence. It's August 1945. Japan is a nation broken beyond recognition. Two of its cities have been erased from the map. Its industrial heart is a graveyard of twisted steel. Its people are starving. And for the first time in over 1,000 years, the proud islands of the rising sun are occupied by a foreign power. To any outside observer, Japan wasn't just defeated, it was finished. A centuries-old culture of martial pride had been crushed under the weight of total war. But fast forward just 40 years. The year is 1985. The setting is the neon-soaked streets of Ginza. Japan is now the world's second-largest economy. Its cars dominate American highways, its electronics are in every home, and its corporations are buying up the most iconic landmarks in New York City. The world was terrified and mesmerized by this economic miracle. How did a nation with no natural resources and a shattered soul rise from the wreckage to become a global titan in a single generation? Most historians will point to American aid or favorable trade policies. They aren't wrong, but they're missing the heartbeat of the story. The secret to Japan's recovery wasn't just money or machines. It was a ghost. It was the enduring, unyielding spirit of the samurai. The katanas were gone, the armor was mothballed, but the code, Bushido, had simply found a new battlefield, the boardroom. You see, the story of the samurai didn't actually end in the 19th century when they were officially disbanded. It just went underground. To understand how Japan conquered the global market, we have to look back at the moment the warriors were told they could no longer be warriors. In 1868, the Meiji Restoration changed everything. The feudal era was over. The government banned the carrying of swords and abolished the class system that had kept the samurai at the top of the social ladder for 700 years. Suddenly, hundreds of thousands of elite fighters, trained from birth in discipline, strategy, and absolute loyalty, were unemployed. Imagine an entire class of people whose only skill was the art of war, suddenly told that war was obsolete. Some chose to rebel and died in the fields of the Satsuma Rebellion, but the smartest among them realized that if they couldn't fight with the blade, they would fight with the abacus. This was the birth of the business samurai. One of the most famous examples was a man named Iwasaki Yataro. He was born into a low-ranking samurai family. When the old world collapsed, he didn't mourn the past. He took the organizational principles he'd learned in the service of his lord and applied them to shipping and mining. He founded a company you might recognize today, Mitsubishi. He didn't run it like a typical Western business, he ran it like a clan. The employees weren't just workers, they were retainers. The goal wasn't just profit, it was national prestige. This mindset began to seep into the very foundation of Japanese industry. The samurai values of Giri, or moral obligation, and Chugi, loyalty, became the blueprint for the modern Japanese corporation. But the real test, the moment where this spirit would be forged in fire, was still decades away. Now, let's pause for a second. When we think of the samurai, we think of seppuku and bloody battles. But the core of Bushido was actually about self-mastery. It was the idea that your life didn't belong to you, it belonged to your purpose. After the devastation of World War II, this philosophy became the ultimate survival tool. In 1945, the Japanese people were facing a collective identity crisis. Their emperor had told them they were no longer divine. Their military was disbanded. They were humiliated. In this void, the old samurai ethos provided a way out. They couldn't have a military, so they decided to make their economy their army. The total war footing that had nearly destroyed them was pivoted towards total production. This is where we see the rise of the salaryman. To a Western eye, the Japanese salaryman of the 1950s and 60s looked like a boring office worker in a dark suit. But look closer. He stayed at the same company for his entire life. He sang the company anthem every morning. He would sacrifice his health, his family time, and his sleep for the success of the firm. This wasn't just corporate drones being exploited. This was the reincarnation of the samurai-lord relationship. The company was the new daimyo, the new feudal lord. In exchange for the workers' absolute loyalty, the company provided lifelong security. This social contract created a workforce that was more disciplined and more motivated than anything the West had ever seen. They weren't just making radios and cameras. They were fulfilling a sacred duty to restore the honor of their nation. But discipline alone isn't enough to build an empire. You need a strategy. And this is where the concept of Kaizen comes in. You've probably heard of it in productivity books, but its roots are deeply spiritual. In the world of the samurai, perfection was a pursuit that never ended. A swordsmith would spend weeks folding steel thousands of times to remove a single impurity. A master of the tea ceremony would spend a lifetime perfecting the angle of a wrist. When this obsession with perfection was applied to manufacturing, the results were terrifyingly effective. In the 1950s, made in Japan meant cheap plastic junk. The Japanese leaders looked at this reputation and treated it as a mark of shame. They didn't just want to compete, they wanted to achieve shokunin, the mastery of the craft. They invited American experts like W. Edwards Deming to teach them statistical quality control, and they embraced it with a religious fervor. While American companies were focused on quarterly profits, Japanese companies were focused on the next 100 years. They looked for tiny, incremental improvements every single day. If a worker on a Toyota assembly line saw a flaw, he had the power to stop the entire factory. This was the equivalent of a samurai sharpening his blade until it could split a hair falling through the air. By the 1970s, the world woke up to a reality where Japanese cars didn't just cost less, they were simply better. But let's look at the darker side of this transition, because the samurai spirit is a double-edged sword. The same intensity that built the high-speed rail and the skyscrapers of Shinjuku also created a culture of karoshi, death from overwork. The pressure to perform for the collective, to never be the one to let the clan down, led to a society of extreme stress. The samurai of old were expected to die for their lord. The modern corporate warrior was expected to work himself to death for the brand. This is a crucial part of the story, because it shows that the economic miracle wasn't free. It was paid for in the blood and sweat of a generation that refused to rest until Japan was back on top. By the 1980s, the transformation was complete. The world was obsessed with Japanese management styles. Books like A Book of Five Rings by the legendary swordsman Miyamoto Musashi became required reading in Wall Street boardrooms. Western CEOs were trying to figure out how to replicate the samurai spirit. They saw the Keiretsu, the massive networks of interconnected companies like Sumitomo and Mitsui, as modern-day military alliances. These groups would support each other, buy from each other, and defend each other against foreign hostile takeovers. It was an economic version of the phalanx, a shield wall that was nearly impossible to break. At the height of the bubble, the land under the Imperial Palace in Tokyo was worth more than the entire state of California. Japan hadn't just rebuilt, it had conquered. However, every empire faces its sunset. In the early 90s, the Japanese economic bubble burst, leading to what historians call the lost decades. The rigid loyalty and the refusal to change that had served them so well in the rebuilding phase became a liability in the fast-moving internet age. The business samurai found themselves in a world where agility was more important than tradition. But if you think the spirit is gone, you're looking in the wrong places. You see it in the way Japan handles disasters, like the 2011 earthquake and tsunami. There was no looting, no chaos. Instead, there was an incredible display of gaman, the ability to endure the unendurable with patience and dignity. That is the samurai heart in its purest form. So what can we learn from the journey from Bushido to business? It tells us that culture is the ultimate renewable resource. A country can lose its factories, its gold, and its territory, but if it keeps its core values, it can always rebuild. The Japanese didn't succeed because they tried to become like the West. They succeeded because they took the best tools of the West and filtered them through the soul of their own history. They proved that the discipline of the warrior is just as effective when building a bridge as it is when winning a battle. Today, Japan faces new challenges, a shrinking population and a changing global landscape. But the ghost of the samurai still lingers in the quiet precision of a high-speed train, the flawless finish of a luxury watch, and the unwavering dedication of a craftsman in a small Tokyo workshop. The sword was taken away, but the hand that held it never lost its strength. It just learned a new way to shape the world. If you found this exploration of history and philosophy fascinating, there is so much more to uncover about how ancient cultures influence our modern world. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive. What other historical warrior codes do you see alive in the world today? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and remember, the tools we use may change, but the spirit behind them is what defines the future. See you in the next one.